The obsidian spire of Caerwyn had not seen a coronation in 200 years. It rose from the heart of the capital like a black needle thrust into the sky, its sides polished smooth by generations of wind and rain, its summit crowned with a single iron beacon that had not been lit since the last Luna laid her hand upon it. Tonight, the beacon burned. Tonight, the spire had been opened. Tonight, every wolf in the kingdom who had been summoned was kneeling on the cold marble of its inner hall, and the air inside that hall was thick with the smoke of 2,000 candles and the silence of 300 held breaths. Vespera Thornwhistle stood in the third row of kneeling supplicants, her forehead pressed against cold marble, her breath ghosting across stone that had absorbed the prayers of 100 generations. Around her, 300 wolves of the gray light pack knelt in absolute silence, their bodies forming concentric rings around the elevated platform at the heart of the spire. She should have been anywhere else. She should have feigned illness, claimed a fever, fled into the whisper wood with nothing but the clothes on her back. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to rise, to run, to put as much distance between herself and this ceremony as her trembling legs could carry her, but she could not move. The kneeling was not a choice, it was a binding. 3 days ago, the new Crown Council had issued the decree. Every female of marriageable age within the kingdom of Caerwyn was to attend the coronation of the new Luna and offer her submission before the moon rose to its full height. Refusal meant exile. Exile meant death, because the lands beyond Caerwyn were ruled by the Shadowfen pack, and the Shadowfen did not take in stragglers. They hunted them. So she knelt. Vespera kept her gaze fixed on the floor, on the flecks of silver embedded in the black marble, on the faint reflection of torchlight that danced across the polished surface like trapped stars. She did not dare look up. She did not dare breathe too loudly. She did not dare let a single thought of him cross her mind, because she knew, with the bone-deep certainty of a woman who had been in love, that her face would betray her if she did. Above her, somewhere on that elevated platform, Caelan Ashvale, Alpha King of Caerwyn, was watching this ceremony unfold. Watching the woman who would become his Luna ascend the obsidian steps. Watching 300 women bow their heads to a stranger he had chosen over the only woman who had ever shared his bed beneath the moon. Vespera's fingers curled against the marble until her nails scraped stone. A soft chime rang through the spire, 3 notes that vibrated in the chest like a second heartbeat. The kneeling deepened. Foreheads pressed harder against the floor. The high speaker's voice rose from the platform, thin and ancient and final. Rise not. Speak not. Look not upon her face until the binding is complete. Vespera closed her eyes. She had loved a king in secret for one full turning of the seasons. She had believed every promise he whispered against her throat. She had believed him when he said the council would see reason, that bloodlines could be rewritten, that fate was stronger than tradition. She had believed him until the night the messenger had arrived at her door with the silver ribbon. The silver ribbon meant, "Do not come to me again." The silver ribbon meant, "You are dismissed." The silver ribbon meant, "Forget." And tonight, kneeling on the cold marble of the obsidian spire, with the woman he had chosen instead of her ascending the throne above her bowed head, Vespera Thornwhistle was finally beginning to understand what forget meant. It meant a slow death from the inside out. The chime sounded again. The binding had begun. The first time she had met him, she had not known he was a king. Vespera let her mind drift backward, away from the cold marble, away from the chiming bells, away from the woman in white whose footsteps she could now hear ascending the platform. She drifted into memory because memory was the only place left where she could still breathe. It had been late autumn, 8 months ago, in the herb gardens behind the Grey Light Infirmary where she worked as an apprentice apothecary. The infirmary served the lower city, the wolves who could not afford the royal physicians, and Vespera had been on her knees in the dirt at sunset, harvesting moonbloom petals before the frost claimed them. A man had stepped out of the shadow of the eastern wall. He had been tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the plain wool of a traveler. His dark hair had been damp with rain. His eyes had caught the last of the sunlight and held it, amber turning to molten gold. "You are crushing the petals," he had said. She had glanced down at her trembling hands and realized he was right. She had been pulling too hard. The bruised petals would yield no salve. "I did not see you there," she had answered, embarrassment heating her cheeks. That was deliberate. He had knelt beside her without invitation, taken a single petal between his thumb and forefinger, and shown her the proper way to twist it free. His hands had been calloused in a way that did not match his bearing. His voice had been quieter than she expected for a man of his size. He had not given her his name. He had returned the next evening, and the one after that, always at dusk, always at the moment between day and night when the world held its breath. He had told her his name was Kalin, that he was a soldier on leave, that he had been wounded in the eastern campaigns and was recovering in the capital before returning to his post. She had believed every word. For 3 months they had met in the herb gardens. For 2 more, they had met in the small loft above the apothecary where she lived alone after her grandmother's death. He had brought her wild flowers stolen from the royal greenhouses. He had read to her from books she could not have afforded in 3 lifetimes. He had laid his head in her lap and let her hum the lullabies her grandmother had sung, and she had watched his face go soft and unguarded in a way that no soldier's face had any right to be. The night he had told her the truth, she had been sharpening a blade at her kitchen table. "Vespera," he had said, kneeling beside her chair so that their eyes were level. "I have lied to you about something important." She had thought he was married. She had braced herself for it. What he had said instead was worse. "My name is Kalin Ashvale. I am the Alpha King of Kerwin." The blade had slipped from her hand. She had risen so fast her chair had toppled backward. She had pressed herself against the wall of her own kitchen as if he were a stranger who had broken in. She had told him to leave, to never return, that she could not, would not, must not. He had not argued. He had only stepped forward, slowly, the way a man approaches a wounded animal, and pressed his forehead against hers. "I will release you the moment you ask it," he had whispered. "But ask it of me, Vespera. Ask it with your full voice." She had not been able to. That night, he had laid her down on the narrow bed in her loft and pressed his lips to the curve of her left shoulder blade. He had asked her permission 3 times. She had given it 3 times. And when his teeth had closed against her skin, when she had felt the heat of his claim sink into her flesh like a brand of starlight, she had understood for the first time in her life what it meant to belong to another soul completely. The mark had appeared in the morning, a perfect crescent of silver, hidden where only he would ever see it. A claiming bite, a promise written in flesh. "Mine," it said, "always." Vespera, kneeling in the obsidian spire 8 months later, pressed her cheek harder against the marble to keep from weeping. Above her, the high speaker's voice rose again. "Behold your Luna, behold the bond." The chime sounded a 3rd time. Something began to burn against her shoulder blade. At first, she thought she had imagined it. A faint warmth, no more than the touch of a candle held too close to skin. Vespera shifted her weight on her knees and tried to ignore it. Tried to focus on the sound of soft footsteps above her. The rustle of silk. The high speaker's voice rising into the carved beams of the spire. Then the warmth became heat. Then the heat became fire. Vespera's breath caught in her throat. The mark on her shoulder blade, the secret crescent of silver that had not stirred in 8 months of grief, was burning. It burned the way coals burned. It burned the way a brand burned. It burned in pulses that matched the rhythm of her own heart, and with each pulse, the heat grew stronger, until she was certain the flesh beneath her dress must be blackening. She pressed her forehead harder against the marble. No, not now. Not here. But the mark would not be silenced. A soft glow began to bloom against the back of her gown. Pale at first, the color of moonlight on water. Then brighter. Then bright enough that the woman kneeling beside her, an old widow named Pelandra, lifted her head in confusion. "Child," Pelandra whispered. "Child, you're back." Vespera could not answer. Her teeth were locked together against the pain, against the heat, against the impossible truth that her body was betraying her in front of 300 witnesses, and a king who had cast her aside. The glow brightened. Silver light spilled across the marble around her. Wolves on either side began to lift their heads, one by one, drawn by the impossible illumination breaking the sacred darkness of the binding. A murmur rose from the kneeling rings, soft as wind through wheat, then sharper, then louder. "Look! Look at her! What is that light?" Vespera squeezed her eyes shut. "Stop. Please stop. Please, please stop." But the mark answered to a will that was not her own, and the will that woke it was rising somewhere above her, somewhere on the platform, somewhere in the chest of a man who had been swearing himself to another woman moments ago. The chime that should have struck for the 4th time did not strike. The high speaker's voice cracked. "Halt the right!" 3 words. 3 words that fell into the obsidian spire like stones into a still pond, and the ripples that moved outward from them would shake the kingdom of Caerwyn for generations. "Halt the right!" Vespera opened her eyes. She lifted her head. She looked up, and she saw him. Caelan Ashvale stood at the edge of the platform with his ceremonial robes half fallen from one shoulder, his amber eyes wide and unblinking, his hand raised toward her as if reaching across an impossible distance. The woman beside him in white silk, the woman whose face she had refused to see, was staring at him with confusion sharpening rapidly into rage. "Caelan," the woman said. "Caelan, what are you—" He did not hear her. He did not see her. His entire being was fixed on the silver light blooming through the back of Vespera's plain gray gown, and his face was the face of a man who had just been struck by lightning in the moment between heartbeats. The face of a man waking from a fever that had lasted 8 months. The face of a man realizing that something had been done to him that he could not yet name. "Vespera," he whispered. The spire heard him. 300 wolves heard him. The woman in white heard him, and her face went the color of bone. "Vespera," he said again, louder. "Vespera, stand up." But Vespera could not stand. The mark was searing her flesh, her vision was blurring at the edges, and around her, the kneeling wolves were rising in confusion, in fear, in 100 whispered questions that swelled into a roar. Then the woman in white moved. She turned to the high speaker with the swiftness of a striking serpent, and she said something Vespera could not hear, something the speaker received with a sharp nod, and the speaker turned to the assembled guards at the foot of the platform and lifted one trembling hand. "Seize the witch," the speaker commanded. "What?" Caelan's voice cracked across the spire. "No, no, do not touch her." But the guards were already moving. Vespera felt hands close around her arms, heavy and gauntleted, and she was hauled to her feet so hard that her shoulder wrenched in its socket. The silver light at her back flared brighter, illuminating the horrified faces of the wolves around her, and she saw, with a clarity that would never leave her, the moment Caelan Ashvale lunged toward the platform's edge to come to her, and was caught, restrained, held back by 2 of his own council members who had moved with terrifying speed. "Take her to the cells," the speaker ordered. "By dawn, the matter will be tried." "Caelan!" Vespera screamed, and her voice tore from her throat with every shred of dignity she had left. Kaelin, what is happening? Kaelin. His amber eyes met hers across the spire. There was no calculation in them. No coldness, no betrayal. There was only horror. Pure, devastated horror. The horror of a man who had just realized he had lost something precious and did not yet understand how, or when, or why. "I will find you," he shouted across the rising chaos. "Vespera, do you hear me? I will find you." The guards dragged her backward through the kneeling crowd. She fought them, kicked them, sank her teeth into the gauntleted wrist of one until she tasted leather and blood. The mark on her shoulder blade burned so brightly now that the light bled through the wool of her gown in visible rays. The last thing she saw before the doors of the spire slammed shut was Kaelin Ashvale on his knees, held down by his own counselors, screaming her name into a hall of 300 wolves who no longer knew which truth to believe. Then the doors closed. Then the world went dark. And Vespera Thornwhistle, apprentice apothecary, secret bonded mate of the Alpha King, was dragged into the bowels of the obsidian spire to await a trial for witchcraft she did not yet know had already been decided. The cell beneath the obsidian spire was carved from the same black marble as the hall above, but here the stone wept. Water seeped through unseen cracks and pooled on the floor in slow black mirrors. The only light came from a single oil lamp set into a niche too high for Vespera to reach, and the only sound was the steady drip of the weeping stone, marking time in a place where time had ceased to mean anything. She did not know how long she had been there. Hours, certainly. Perhaps a full day. The mark on her shoulder blade no longer burned, but it pulsed faintly beneath her gown, a slow heartbeat that was not her own. Every time it pulsed, she felt something distant and frantic press against the edge of her mind, like a hand searching for hers in absolute darkness. She pressed her palm to her shoulder and tried not to weep. She had wept enough already, wept until her throat was raw, until her eyes were swollen, until the guards at the door had laughed and told her to save her tears for the gallows. She had no tears left. What remained inside her was something colder, something sharper, something that had begun to take shape somewhere between the slamming of the spire doors and the third hour of darkness. Anger. Not at Kaelin, at the woman in white. At the high speaker, whose hand had trembled when he gave the order. At the council members who had moved too quickly, too smoothly, as if they had rehearsed the moment of restraint 100 times before it occurred. Something had been waiting for her mark to shine. Something had known it would. Vespera drew her knees up to her chest and pressed her back against the cold wall, and she made herself think. Made herself replay every detail of the coronation in the merciless clarity that comes only after grief has burned itself out. The silver ribbon, 8 months ago, that had ended their meetings without explanation. Kaelin had never once tried to contact her after. Not a letter, not a messenger, not a single word. She had told herself he had simply tired of her, but he had not been a man who tired of anything. The woman in white, whose face Vespera had been forbidden to look upon. The council had decreed that no female could lift her gaze until the binding was complete. Why? The high speaker, who had ordered her seizure within seconds of her mark revealing itself. As if witchcraft were an answer he already had prepared. Kaelin's face, when he had seen her. The horror. The recognition. The way he had looked at her like a man waking from a long, dreamless sleep. A low scrape at the door. Vespera lifted her head. The small iron grate at the base of the door slid open. A folded scrap of parchment was pushed through. Then the grate closed again, and footsteps retreated rapidly down the corridor, the gate too quick to be a guard's. She crawled across the wet floor on her hands and knees and snatched up the parchment. It was warm. Someone had been holding it against their skin. She unfolded it with shaking fingers. The lamp was too high to read by, so she pressed the parchment beneath the falling light and squinted at the small, hurried script. 3 lines. No signature. The wine was not for him. It was for you. Do not drink anything they bring. The bond was never broken. Trust the one who comes for you at the second bell. Vespera read it twice. 3 times. 4. Then she pressed the parchment to her lips and held it there. Because somewhere above her, in a kingdom she no longer trusted, a stranger had risked their life to tell her she was not alone. She tore the parchment into small pieces, swallowed them one by one, and waited for the second bell. 6 months later, in a fishing village 300 miles from Caerwyn, a woman named Soraya Briarwood was teaching a child how to set a broken finger. Pull straight, not toward you, not away, straight. The boy, no older than 7, wrinkled his small face in concentration. His sister, the patient, sat on the wooden bench with her hand cradled in her lap and a thumb bent at an angle no thumb should ever have. She watched her brother with the patient resignation of an older sibling who had been through worse. Like this? Slower. The boy pulled. The thumb slid back into its socket with a soft click. The girl did not cry. She only nodded once, and then looked up at Soraya with the bright-eyed wonder of a child who had just witnessed a miracle. Will it work right again? In a week, Soraya said. Keep it bound. No climbing trees. She always climbs trees, the boy muttered. Then tie her to a chair. The girl giggled. The boy bowed solemnly. Soraya waved them out of her small wooden cottage and watched them race down the muddy lane toward the harbor, where their mother was mending nets with the other fisherwives of Penhallow. Soraya Briarwood was not Soraya Briarwood. She was Vespera Thornwhistle, and she had been Soraya Briarwood for 173 days. She closed the door of her cottage and leaned her forehead against the rough wood. Outside, the sea wind rattled the shutters and carried the cries of gulls. Inside, the cottage smelled of dried lavender and pine resin and the slow simmer of a healing broth she had been preparing since dawn. She walked to her work table and picked up the wooden spoon. She stirred. She did not let herself think about the night of the second bell. She did not let herself remember the woman with the cropped silver hair who had unlocked her cell and pressed a cloak into her arms and led her through corridors no royal map showed. She did not let herself remember the tunnel beneath the kitchens, the ride on a sway-backed mare through the Whisperwood, the coastal trader who had taken her north without asking her name. She did not let herself remember the silver-haired woman's last words before they parted at a crossroads in the gray hour before dawn. The king does not know. Make sure he never finds out. Not until it is safe. Until what was safe, the woman had not said. Vespera had crossed 3 borders and changed her name twice before she had stopped looking over her shoulder. She had arrived in Penhallow at the edge of the northern sea with nothing but the cloak on her back, the silver pendant her grandmother had left her, and a small leather pouch containing 7 dried moonbloom petals from the herb garden where she had first met him. The villagers had taken her in because she could mend bones and brew fevers down. The widow Malis had given her this cottage in exchange for tending to the sick of the village. The fishermen had begun calling her the Witch of the Dunes, but with affection, the way one says the wise one in a village where wisdom was rarer than fish. She had built a life. She had built a life, and she was carrying his child, and the mark on her shoulder blade had never stopped burning. Vespera set down the spoon and pressed her hand flat against her belly. The baby had begun to move 3 weeks ago. Small, deliberate movements, like a fish testing the boundaries of a still pool. The midwife in Penhallow had pressed her ear to Vespera's stomach and listened for a long time and then said, in a careful voice, that the heartbeat was unusual. Unusual how? It pauses. Pauses? Every 4th beat. Like it is waiting for something. Vespera had not asked what it might be waiting for. She had thanked the midwife, paid her in dried herbs, and walked home along the cliff road with her hand pressed to her belly and the wind whipping her hair across her face. She knew what it was waiting for. She had felt it every night for 6 months, a pull at the edge of her mind, a present searching, a desperate awareness that came to her in dreams she could not quite remember when she woke. She would startle from sleep with the taste of his name in her mouth and the feeling of his hand on her face, and she would lie in the dark listening to the sea and trying to convince herself that the bond had broken, that he had stopped looking, that she was free. She was not free. She had never been free. The mark pulsed against her shoulder blade as she stood at her work table, and Vespera closed her eyes and let herself, for the space of one indrawn breath, reach back toward it, toward him. Somewhere far to the south, in a kingdom she had fled, something flared in answer. She gasped. The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. The flare was sharp this time, sharper than it had been in months, as if the searching had grown closer, as if the distance between them was narrowing. A knock sounded at her door. Vespera froze. Penhallow was a small village. She knew the knock of every neighbor, the rhythm of the baker's daughter, the fisherwife's 3 quick taps. This was none of them. This was the knock of a stranger, polite and patient and entirely unhurried. She did not move. The knock came again. A voice spoke through the door, low and male and unfamiliar. "Mistress Briarwood, I have ridden 7 days to find you. May I come in?" Vespera did not answer. She crossed the small room in silence, picked up the iron poker from beside her hearth, and stood with her back pressed against the wall beside the door. The baby kicked once, sharply. She laid her free hand over her belly and willed the child to be still. "Mistress Briarwood," the voice said again. "I have come alone. I am unarmed. I am not here on behalf of any pack." She tightened her grip on the poker. "What do you want?" she said through the door, making her voice as steady as she could manage. A pause. "I want to deliver a message from the woman who set you free." The poker slipped an inch in her palm. The silver-haired woman. No one in Penhallow knew about the silver-haired woman. Vespera had never spoken of her, never written of her, never breathed her existence aloud. "What was her name?" Vespera demanded. "She does not give her name, but she gave me 3 words to say to you. The wine was not." Vespera's knees almost buckled. The first 3 words of the note that had come through the grate of her cell. The words she had swallowed with the parchment. The words no one in the world could have known except herself, and the woman who had written them. She unbarred the door. The man who stood on her threshold was smaller than she had braced herself for. Slight of build, gray-cloaked, with hair the color of pale wheat, and eyes the soft brown of a deer in the underbrush. He looked nothing like a soldier. He looked, in fact, like a clerk who had wandered too far from his desk and was startled to find himself at the edge of the sea. He saw the poker. He saw her belly. He bowed his head. "My name is Valence. I serve no king. I serve only the sisterhood of the Pale Hand, and I have been sent to speak with you." "The sisterhood of the what?" "May I come inside? What I have to say is not safe to speak in the open." She stepped back, but she did not lower the poker. Valence entered her cottage with the careful steps of a man who had been told the woman before him was dangerous. He stood in the center of the small room with his hands clasped before him and waited until she had closed and barred the door. "Speak," she said. "The kingdom of Carwin is at the edge of war." Vespera lowered the poker an inch. 6 months ago, Oren continued, the Alpha King began a search that has consumed every hour of his waking life. He has dismissed 3 council members. He has interrogated every guard who stood watch the night you vanished. He has personally ridden to 4 of the 5 border provinces. Last week, in the city of Mirenhold, he tore open the gates of a house where he believed a woman matching your description was being held. The woman was not you. She was a miller's daughter with a similar coloring. He went to his knees in the street and wept in front of his own soldiers, and the city has not stopped speaking of it since. Vespera's hand moved to her belly without her permission. He is searching for me. He has been searching for you since the morning after your trial. My trial? Oren's careful expression did not change, but something in his eyes flickered. You did not know there was a trial. I was taken from the spire. I was put in a cell. A woman came in the night and freed me. I have not heard a single word from Kerwin in 6 months. She drew a shuddering breath. What trial? The day after your seizure, the council convened in the spire and tried you in absentia for the crime of practicing forbidden bond magic against the king's person. They produced witnesses. They produced evidence. They produced, mistress, a confession written in your own hand. I did not write a confession. They produced one. The seal at the bottom matched the apothecary seal of your shop. The handwriting was, by the testimony of 3 court scribes, indistinguishable from your own. Vespera sat down very suddenly on the edge of her workbench. They said, Oren continued, his voice softening for the first time, that you had ensnared the Alpha King through a charm woven into the herbs of his evening tea. They said the silver mark that appeared on your shoulder during the coronation was not a true claiming bite, but a counterfeit, a forgery, a magical brand you had given yourself in an attempt to bind him. They said you had fled the cell during the night using witchcraft. They sentenced you to death by burning. The sentence stands. There are bounty hunters in every province carrying drawings of your face. She could not breathe. The king, Oren said quietly, did not attend the trial. He was, by all accounts, locked in his own chambers under the protection of a healer who feared for his sanity. By the time he was well enough to demand a retrial, the sentence had been ratified by the full council and could not be undone by royal decree alone. The woman he was meant to bind to that night has, in the absence of a completed coronation, taken the title of Acting Luna. She rules at his side in everything but name. She has made it her personal cause to find you and finish what the trial began. Vespera lifted her face. Her name. She is called Marivel Drauven, daughter of the High Speaker, niece of the Council Master, cousin, by marriage, to 4 of the 7 provincial governors. They built this, Vespera whispered. They have been building it for years. A long silence stretched between them. The sea wind rattled the shutters. The fire popped in the hearth. The baby moved, twice, sharp and insistent. Why are you here? Vespera finally asked. Because the Sisterhood of the Pale Hand has been watching House Drauven for 3 generations. We placed an agent within the spire 2 decades ago, a woman who has spent her life waiting for the moment House Drauven moved against the throne. She freed you. She has kept you hidden. And she has now sent me, because something has changed. And you must know it before the Drauven hunters reach Penhallow. He paused. What has changed? Vespera asked. The king has discovered the truth of what was done to him. He learned it 9 days ago. The moment he learned it, he locked himself in the spire with 3 of his most trusted wolves and did not emerge for 2 days. When he came out, he had a name. Oren met her eyes. He had your name, mistress. Your true name. Vespera Thornwhistle. He is no longer searching for a stranger. He is searching for you. And he is closer than House Drauven knows. The mark on her shoulder blade flared so brightly that the silver light bled through the back of her dress, and Oren Valence, agent of the Sisterhood of the Pale Hand, took an involuntary step backward. Mistress, he whispered. I know, she said. She placed her hand over her belly, where his child was kicking with the rhythm of a heart that paused every 4th beat as if waiting for something to come home. Outside, far down the cliff road, a horn sounded. It was not a horn she had ever heard before. It was a hunting horn, and it was very, very close. Oren moved before Vespera did. He crossed the small room in 3 quick strides, caught the iron poker she had let fall, and pressed it back into her hand. "The cellar," he said. "Now." "There is no cellar." "The trapdoor beneath the woven rug, mistress. The one you have not opened in 6 months. I know about it because the woman who hid you here is the woman who built it." Vespera stared at him. "Malus. The widow Malus is the second eye of the sisterhood in the northern reaches. She has been guarding you since the moment you set foot in Penhallow." He moved to the window, peered through the slats of the shutter, and his jaw tightened. 3 riders, cresting the cliff road. Half a turn of the glass before they reached this door. The horn sounded again. Closer. Vespera looked down at her belly, at the curve that had grown impossible to hide, and made a decision she did not consciously remember making. "I am not going into a cellar. Mistress. I have spent 6 months hiding. I have spent 6 months being told who hunts me and who protects me, and who decides whether I live or die. I will not crawl into a hole and wait for men to drag me out by the hair." She lifted the poker. "Tell me what you came to tell me. The full of it. Now," before they reached the door. Oren studied her for a long, measuring moment. Then he bowed his head briefly and spoke very fast. "Marivelle Drauven did not poison the king with herbs in his tea. The Drauvens have a far older method. 3 generations ago, they purchased a relic from the southern witch marshes called the Hollow Crown. It is a circlet of black iron, no larger than a child's bracelet. When pressed against the brow of a sleeping wolf at the moment of the new moon, it severs the bond between the wolf and his fated mate for one full turning of the seasons. It does not break the bond permanently. It silences it. The wolf forgets. The mate is forgotten. The fated thread between them goes dark, and during that darkness, the wolf can be guided into a binding of another's choosing." Vespera's breath stopped. "They put it on him. The night before they sent the silver ribbon to your door. The High Speaker himself performed the ritual. The king woke the next morning with no memory of the apothecary in the herb garden. No memory of the loft above the shop. No memory of the woman he had marked 2 months earlier. He had only a vague unease, a dream he could not quite place, and a counsel that assured him it was the lingering effect of a hunting injury he had taken weeks before. For 8 months he forgot me. For 8 months he was made to forget you. The two are not the same." The horn sounded a third time. The riders were perhaps 2 minutes away. Oren spoke faster. "The relic's effect is bound to its physical presence. House Drauven kept the hollow crown in a vault beneath the spire. The bond would have remained silenced for the full year, long enough to complete the binding to Marivelle, long enough to declare an heir, long enough to make the displacement permanent. But on the night of the coronation, when you were brought into the spire and forced to kneel within 30 paces of the king, the proximity strained the relic past its tolerance. The bond cracked through the silence. Your mark caught the fracture. It shone." Vespera pressed her hand against her shoulder blade. "That is why they were ready," she whispered. "That is why the High Speaker had the order prepared. They knew the relic had limits. They knew if I was ever brought close enough. They knew, and they prepared. The trial documents were written before the coronation. The bounty drawings were drafted a week in advance. The witnesses were paid the morning of the binding. Everything was waiting, in case the unthinkable happened. And the king was returned to the relic immediately after you were taken. Marivelle pressed it against his brow the moment the spire doors closed. He forgot you a second time. Then how? 9 days ago," Oren said, "the woman who freed you broke into the vault beneath the spire and destroyed the hollow crown." Vespera could not speak. She crushed it under the heel of an iron hammer. She burned the fragments. She scattered the ash into the southern river. The instant the last fragment was destroyed, the king collapsed in his chambers. He was unconscious for 31 hours. When he woke, he remembered everything: the herb garden, the loft, the mark, You. And she, Vespera whispered. What happened to the woman who freed me? Oren did not answer at once. She is dead, mistress. Marivel's wolves found her 3 nights ago in the woods south of the capital. She fought 4 of them. She killed 2. The sisterhood recovered her body and burned it in the old way. The fire popped. The wind howled against the shutters. Somewhere outside, much closer now, hooves struck the cliff road in a hard gallop. Vespera lowered her face into her free hand. What was her name? Aldrith Vorn. Aldrith. She turned the name over in her mouth like a small, smooth stone. I never knew it. She did not want you to. A name is a thing that can be forced from a captive. She would not give you that risk. The hooves were perhaps 30 seconds away. Oren moved to the door, drew a slim blade from inside his coat, and spoke without looking at her. The riders coming up the cliff road are not the king's men. The king does not yet know where you are. These are Marivel's hunters. They have orders to take you alive if possible and dead if necessary, but the dead is preferred. They will not let you reach the king. They cannot afford to. The moment he looks upon you, the moment your mark answers his, every lie House Druven has spun for 8 months collapses. The council will fall. The kingdom will know. And so they will burn this cottage to the ground with you inside it before they ever let it happen. He turned. Now will you go into the cellar? Vespera looked at the iron poker in her hand. She looked at the small leather pouch on the shelf above her work table, where 7 dried moonbloom petals waited. She looked down at her belly, where his child kicked in the strange, paused rhythm of a heartbeat waiting for its other half. No, she said. She set the poker on the table. She walked to the shelf, took down the leather pouch, and pressed all 7 petals into her left palm. The sisterhood teaches healing, she said. My grandmother taught me something else. Oren's eyes narrowed. Mistress, what are you? My grandmother was a hedge witch from the Whisperwood. Before she died, she taught me one working. Only one. She told me I would know the day I needed it. Vespera closed her fist around the petals. I think today is the day. The first horse pulled up in the lane outside. A man's voice barked an order. Oren Valence crossed himself in the southern fashion, bowed his head, and stepped to the side of the door. Vespera drew a breath that filled her to the bones. She lifted her left hand. She opened her fingers. The 7 moonbloom petals rose into the air above her palm and began, very slowly, to glow. The door splintered inward. 3 men crossed the threshold at a hard run, heavy boots cracking the floorboards, swords already drawn. They were dressed in the gray and oxblood of a private guard. No royal insignia, no pack crest. Hired blades wearing the colors of a house that did not yet sit a throne. The first one through the door died before he understood he had entered the wrong cottage. A petal of moonbloom moved across the air toward him, lazy as a falling feather, and when it touched the bare skin of his wrist, his entire arm went the color of frost. He stumbled, looked down at the gray-white veins climbing toward his shoulder, and made a small, surprised sound that ended in a wet collapse before he could lift his sword a second time. The second hunter saw it. He skidded to a halt, swung his blade in a defensive arc, and shouted a word over his shoulder that Vespera did not catch. The third hunter, still in the doorway, threw something dark and round into the room. It struck the floor between Vespera and Oren, cracked open like an egg, and released a cloud of acrid yellow smoke. Vespera's eyes streamed instantly, her throat closed. She could not see. But the petals could. She had not known they could until that moment. The small, glowing things lifted on their own, 6 remaining petals, and they parted the smoke around her in a slow circle, clearing a sphere of clean air no larger than her own body. Oren was less fortunate. She heard him cough, heard the scrape of his boots as he stumbled, heard the sound of a blade meeting a body and a man crying out, but she could not tell whose body or whose cry. The second hunter came at her through the smoke. He was fast. He had clearly been trained to fight in poor visibility because he came in low and from the side, his blade aimed not at her chest, but at her belly. He meant to end the air before he ended her. Vespera's wolf, the one she did not yet know she had, woke in her chest like a struck bell. She did not think. Her right hand came up, the one not holding the petals, and she felt something pour out of her that she had no name for. It was not the healing magic she had practiced in cottages and infirmaries. It was older. It was rawer. It was the part of her that had spent 6 months grieving and 3 days kneeling and half a year carrying a child whose father had been stolen from her, and it came out of her hand as a sound rather than a force, a scream. Wordless, towering, the hunter was thrown backward through the smoke as if he had been struck by a horse at full gallop. He hit the far wall hard enough to crack the plaster. He slid to the floor and did not rise. The third hunter was already moving toward the door, retreating. He had seen what happened to the first, what happened to the second, and his orders did not include martyrdom. Vespera did not let him go. She took one step forward, then another. The remaining 6 petals turned around her in a slow, glowing wheel, and she lifted her left hand, and one petal detached and drifted with terrible patience across the cottage and through the doorway, and touched the back of the hunter's neck just above his collar. He did not even cry out. He simply went still, very gradually, like a man easing himself into a deep, cold pool. And then he was on his knees in the lane, and then he was on his face, and then he was nothing but a shape in the dirt. The yellow smoke began to thin. Vespera could see again. Oren was on the floor against the hearth, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. The first hunter sprawled near the door. The second slumped against the cracked wall. The third lay in the lane outside. Vespera went to Oren first. How bad? Worse than I would like. His voice was steady, but his face had gone gray. Below the ribs. He missed the artery, I think. Hold still. She pressed her right palm to the wound. The healing magic rose in her, warm and gold and familiar, and she poured it into him until the bleeding slowed, until the gray left his face, until his breathing eased. You should rest, she said. I cannot. There will be more. Marivelle does not send 3 hunters to take a target. She sends 3 as a first wave. The second wave will be half a day behind. Then we need to be gone before half a day. We? You did not ride 7 days through 3 borders to die in my cottage, Master Valence. Nor did you intend to leave alone. She helped him sit up against the hearth. Where would the sisterhood take me from here? Oren shook his head. Mistress, the sisterhood is no longer in a position to take you anywhere. With Aldrich dead, our network in the capital is broken. Our agents are scattered. I came to warn you, not to extract you. I had hoped. He trailed off. Hoped what? Hoped you would consent to ride south. Toward him. Vespera said nothing. He is in the city of Halvern, Oren said. 3 days hard ride from here. He is gathering a force loyal to him personally, outside the council's command. He does not yet know where you are, but he is searching this region. If you ride south and he rides north, you will meet on the Terafell road inside of 4 days, if you survive the second wave. A floorboard creaked at the door. Vespera was on her feet with the petals raised before she realized she had moved. A boy stood on the threshold. The same boy she had taught that morning to set his sister's broken thumb. His face was streaked with dirt. His eyes were enormous. In his small fist he clutched a folded piece of paper. Mistress Briarwood, he said. Melis sent me. She said you would know what to do. He held out the paper. Vespera took it with her free hand and unfolded it. 3 lines, written in a hand she had never seen, in ink that smelled faintly of pine resin. Ride to the standing stones at Terafell. He will meet you there. He knows your true name. He is coming. Below the 3 lines was a single mark, a crescent of silver. The same shape, the same curve, the same impossible signature as the mark burning beneath her dress. Vespera pressed the paper to her lips. "Tell Malus," she said to the boy, "that I am going." The boy nodded once and ran. Outside, the wind shifted. The sea rose. And far to the south, on a road she had never traveled, something was coming toward her at the speed of a man who had spent half a year learning the shape of the wound her absence had carved into him. The standing stones of Terafell rose from a windswept meadow at the meeting place of 3 roads. There were 9 of them, taller than men, gray and lichen-streaked, and older than any kingdom that had ever claimed the soil beneath them. They stood in a rough circle, and at the center of the circle the grass grew in a strange spiral pattern that could be seen only when the late sun struck it from the west. Vespera and Oren reached the stones at dusk on the 4th day. The ride had nearly killed them both. Oren's wound had reopened twice, and Vespera had healed it twice, and by the 3rd dawn her own hands were trembling with the cost of it. They had eaten what they could forage. They had slept in turns. They had outrun a second wave of Marivel's hunters at a river crossing 2 days back, and only the storm that had risen from nowhere to drown the ford behind them had saved their lives. Vespera had not asked aloud where the storm had come from. She knew. She slid from the saddle into the meadow grass and stood for a long moment with one hand braced against her horse's flank. The mark on her shoulder blade burned steadily now, no longer pulsing but holding, a constant low fire that had grown stronger with every mile she had ridden south. Oren remained mounted. He scanned the road to the south with one hand on his blade. "How long?" Vespera asked. "Soon." "How soon?" "Mistress, I have been a courier for 15 years. I know the sound of a hard-ridden horse on a stone road. He is inside of 1 turn of the glass, perhaps half." Vespera nodded. She walked into the circle of stones. She did not know why. Something in her wanted to meet him standing on ground that had been sacred before either of their bloodlines had a name. She walked to the center of the spiral and turned to face the southern road, and she waited. The sun sank lower. The stones threw long shadows. The wind died. In the deep stillness that followed, she heard the hooves. They came from the south at a gallop, then slowed, then stopped at the foot of the meadow. She heard a man dismount. She heard him speak briefly to someone who must have ridden with him. She heard him walk into the meadow, slowly, and then more slowly, and then with the careful gait of a man who was afraid that if he moved too fast, the woman at the center of the circle would prove to be a vision after all. She did not turn until he was inside the ring. When she turned, Kaelin Ashvale, Alpha King of Caerwyn, was 10 paces from her, and he was weeping without sound. He looked thinner than she remembered. He looked older. His dark hair was longer, unbound, falling past his shoulders. His amber eyes were rimmed in red, and there was a hollowness in his face that had not been there in the apothecary loft, in the herb garden, in any of the nights they had ever spent together. Half a year of forgetting her had nearly killed him. She saw it in him. "Vespera," he said. The word was not a greeting. It was a prayer offered up by a man who had not been certain his God still existed. She did not answer at once. She could not. Her throat had closed around 8 months of grief, and 3 days of kneeling, and 173 days of being Soraya Briarwood, and none of it would let her speak. He took a single step forward. He stopped. "May I come closer?" The question undid her. The Alpha King of Caerwyn, master of 100 war bands, ruler of a kingdom that stretched from the Whisperwood to the southern sea, was asking permission to come within arm's length of the woman he had marked with his own teeth. Vespera nodded. He crossed the distance. He did not touch her. Not yet. He stopped a single pace away and stood before her, and he looked down at the swell of her belly beneath the traveling cloak, and his face did something she had no language for. "How long?" he whispered. "Almost 7 months." 7? Yes. He sank to his knees in the spiral grass. He pressed his forehead to her belly, and he wrapped his arms around her hips, and he wept then, openly, the way a man weeps, who has come home to a house he believed had burned. The baby kicked against his brow. A sound broke out of him that was half laugh and half sob. "There you are," he said to the child. "There you are." Vespera placed her hands in his hair. She did not know how long they stayed like that. The sun set. The first stars came out. The wind crept back into the meadow and cooled the sweat on her neck. Oren Valence, somewhere outside the circle of stones, kept his back turned and his eyes on the horizon and gave them what privacy a meadow could provide. When Kaelin finally rose, his face was wet and he was not ashamed of it. He cupped her face in both his hands. "I forgot you," he whispered. "I forgot you. And I do not know how to ask for forgiveness for a thing I did not know I was doing. You did not do it. They did it to you. It was still my body, my voice, my hand that signed the documents, my silence that allowed her to take your trial. I cannot give that back to you, Vespera. I cannot give back what was stolen. I can only swear to you that for as long as my heart still beats, I will spend every beat of it making certain no one ever again touches a single hair on your head. Kaelin. I know it is not enough. Kaelin, look at me." He did. "I waited 8 months for you," she said. "I knelt on cold marble for 3 days. I crossed 3 borders with nothing but a cloak and a pendant. I have been hunted, lied about, sentenced to death in my absence. I have built a new life under a new name, and I have carried your child alone, and I have done all of it without ever stopping believing, in the deepest part of myself, that whatever had taken you from me was not your choice." She pressed her hand against his chest, against the heart she could feel hammering beneath his shirt. "I am not asking for an apology. I am asking for the truth, the whole of it, spoken aloud between us, and then I am asking for you to take me home." He covered her hand with his. "The truth is yours, all of it. From the night they put the hollow crown on me to the morning I woke screaming your name. From the trial, I did not attend to the moment Aldrich Vorn crushed the relic and gave me back to myself. I will tell you every word of it, as many times as you need to hear it. And home? Home is wherever you are standing. But the spire is mine to take back, Vespera. They put the woman who stole 8 months of my life on a throne that does not belong to her. They put the men who poisoned me into the seats of the council. They have hunted my mate across 3 kingdoms with the intent of burning her body in a public square. They have done this in my name, and I will not allow them to draw another breath of free air for it." The mark on her shoulder blade flared in answer. His own answered back, a low pulse of heat she could feel through the front of his shirt. "Then we ride," she said. "Then we ride." He leaned down. He pressed his forehead to hers. He did not kiss her. Not yet. Because the kiss they would share would be the first kiss of a king and his queen, and there was a kingdom standing between them and the moment they could give it. But he held her there in the circle of stones, with her belly between them and the wind in their hair and the night closing around the meadow, and for the first time in 8 months, the bond between them sang in full and unbroken voice. A horn sounded in the distance. This time, it was a horn she knew. It was the horn of the king's personal guard, 4 short notes followed by a long one, the call that meant the king is found and the king is safe. Kaelin lifted his head. "My wolves," he said. "How many?" 200, camped a half-mile down the road. They will follow me into the spire itself." Vespera looked toward the southern road, where the horn was still sounding. "Then let us not keep them waiting." They rode through the night. Kaelin would not let her ride alone. He lifted her onto his own war horse, a great black stallion with eyes the color of riverbed stones, and settled himself behind her, with one arm braced firmly around her belly and the other holding the reins. She protested for the space of 3 breaths, and then surrendered, because his chest against her back was the warmest thing she had felt in 8 months, and because the baby went still inside her the moment his hand settled over the curve, as if a long argument had finally been resolved. 200 wolves rode with them. She had never seen such a force move at speed. They flowed across the meadows and the moonlit roads in a silent, ordered current, half on horseback and half running on 4 legs alongside, their breath ghosting in the cold air, their eyes catching the starlight in flashes of amber and gold. Oren Valence rode near the king on a fresh mount, his wound dressed and bound, his face pale but resolute. Kaelin spoke to her as they rode. He told her about the morning he had woken with the hollow crown destroyed, and remembered her name. He told her about the hour he had spent on the floor of his own bedchamber, unable to stand, unable to weep, unable to do anything but repeat her name into the silence, as if the word itself could undo what had been done. He told her about the moment he had walked into the council chamber, still half-dressed, and looked across the long table at Marivel Drauven and known, in the pit of his bones, that the woman seated at his right hand was the woman who had built the cage. "Why did you not kill her then?" Vespera asked. "Because I had no proof yet. Because half the council was hers. Because the moment I moved against her without evidence, she would have raised the provincial governors against me, and I would have been deposed before sundown." His voice was very quiet against her ear. "And because I did not yet know if you were alive, Vespera, if she had taken you, if she had hidden you, if she had any leverage at all over your life, I could not afford to act until I had found you first. And now I have found you. Now Marivel Drauven has run out of leverage." They reached the outskirts of Halvern in the gray hour before dawn. A scout came back from the southern road at a hard gallop, drew alongside the king, and spoke in low, fast words. Kaelin's arm tightened around her, his jaw set. "What is it?" she asked. "A complication. Marivel has moved." He drew a breath. "3 nights ago, while I was riding north for you, she summoned the council to an emergency session. She produced a document signed by the High Speaker and 4 of the 7 provincial governors. The document declares me unfit to rule by reason of bond sickness. It names her regent of Caerwyn until such time as I am restored to my senses or replaced. The spire has been closed to me. The royal seal has been transferred to her hand. As of 2 nights ago, by the law of the council, I am no longer king." Vespera turned in the saddle to look at him. "And the wolves?" "The wolves are mine. The army is mine. 3 of the 7 governors refused to sign and have already declared for me. But by the letter of the council's law, if I march on the spire now, I am no longer a king reclaiming his throne. I am a usurper. The 200 wolves behind us become rebels. The kingdom splits. What does she want? My surrender. She has sent word that if I present myself at the spire alone and unarmed, she will spare every wolf who rode with me. If I refuse, she will declare civil war within the day and put the blood of every fallen wolf on my hands." Vespera was silent for a long moment. "There is more," she said. "There is more. Tell me." He did not want to. She could feel the reluctance in his arm, in his breath, in the way his hand spread protectively across her belly. "She has taken hostages," he said. The world narrowed. "Who?" "The widow Malis was captured at her cottage in Penhallow yesterday morning. 3 of the fisher wives who had befriended you. The midwife who tended you. A boy. 41 of your neighbors in total. They were taken to the spire by sea on a fast cutter and arrived last night. Marivel has announced that they will be tried at noon today as accomplices to your witchcraft. The sentence, if I do not surrender by then, will be carried out at sunset." Vespera could not breathe. The boy. Vespera. The boy who came to my cottage with the note. Was he taken? I do not know his name. His name is Tommeling. He is 7 years old. He cannot read. He set his sister's broken thumb 3 days ago, and I told him not to let her climb trees. Her voice broke on the last word. Was he taken, Kaylin? A long pause. Yes. She closed her eyes. The army rode on through the lightening dawn, and Vespera sat very still in the circle of his arms, and the baby inside her kicked once, hard, against the place where his hand was pressed. I am going to the spire, she said. Vespera, no. I am going to the spire, and I am going alone, and I am going to walk through the front gate and present myself to her before the noon trial begins. Vespera. She wants me. She has always wanted me. The hostages are bait, and they will die if I do not take the bait. Vespera turned in the saddle, far enough that she could see his face. If you ride on the spire, the kingdom splits. If you surrender, she kills you the moment your blade leaves your hand. If I walk in alone, she has what she wants. The hostages live. The kingdom does not split. And you, my king, get the one thing she does not expect to give you. What thing? Time. His face went very still. Time for what? Time for the army. You are not supposed to have to circle the spire from the north and take the east gate while she is in the great hall, watching me kneel for the second time in my life. Time for Oren Valence to use whatever the sisterhood has left in the capital. Time for the truth to be made loud enough that the High Speaker's signature on her document cannot save him. She placed her hand against his cheek. I went into the spire once because they made me. I will go in this time because I choose to. There is a difference, Kaylin. She does not understand that there is a difference. And if she kills you the moment you cross the threshold? Then she kills the Alpha King's mate in front of the surviving council, in front of the hostages, in front of every wolf in the city, and the bond between us will scream loudly enough through every wolf in Caerwyn that no one in this kingdom will ever again accept her as Luna. Vespera's voice was steady. She cannot kill me quietly. That is the only weapon I have, and it is enough. Kaylin looked at her for a long, long moment. Then he leaned his forehead against hers and closed his eyes. You have grown teeth, my heart. I have always had teeth. You only saw me in the kitchen. A laugh broke out of him, small and wet. Tell me your plan. She told him. She told him as the sun rose and the army crested the last hills, and the obsidian spire came into view in the distance, black and tall and waiting. She told him as Oren Valence rode close to listen and to add his own pieces, the names of agents still in the capital, the locations of side gates and servants' tunnels, the timing of the changing of the guard. When she had finished, Kaylin drew rein at the edge of a small stand of oaks 1/2 mile from the city walls. He dismounted. He lifted her down with both hands. He stood her on the soft earth and gathered her against him, belly between them, mark to mark, and he kissed her at last. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman who is walking into a fire to save his kingdom. He kissed her as if memorizing her. He kissed her as if to say, if this is the last, let it carry both of us through whatever comes after. When he released her, his eyes were burning gold. 3 hours, he said. From the moment you cross the threshold of the spire, I will give you 3 hours. Then we come for you. 3 hours will be enough. Vespera. Yes. If she touches our child? I know. He pressed his hand against her belly one last time. The baby kicked into his palm. He drew his thumb across the curve of it, and his face broke and reformed in the same heartbeat. Go, he said, before I lose the strength to let you. She turned toward the city. She did not look back. She walked alone down the long road toward the obsidian spire, where the woman who had stolen 8 months of her life was waiting with 41 hostages and a dagger she did not yet know would be turned against her own throat. The mark on her shoulder blade burned bright as a sunrise. Behind her, a king began to give orders to his army in a voice that no longer trembled. The guards at the spire's outer gate did not recognize her at first. She had pulled her cloak up over her hair. She had wiped the road dust from her face. She had walked the last quarter-mile alone through the awakening streets of the capital, past wolves who glanced at her without seeing, past the morning carts of bread and milk and fish. She had walked unseen because she had decided to be unseen, because the bond beneath her shoulder blade was pulsing with a steady protective rhythm that came from a man half a mile to the north who was holding her in his thoughts like a lantern. When she reached the gate, she lowered her hood. The captain of the guard took one look at her face and went the color of bone. "You," he said. "I am here," she said, "to surrender myself to the acting Luna. Please escort me to the great hall." He could not speak for a moment. "The trial begins at noon," he finally said. "It is not yet 10. She is not—" "Then take me to her wherever she is. She will want to see me before the trial. Trust me on this." He took her to her. Marivelle Drauven was in the small council chamber that adjoined the great hall, seated at the head of a long oaken table, surrounded by 4 members of the council and the High Speaker himself. She was dressed in deep crimson, her pale silver hair coiled around her head like a crown that had not yet been placed. She looked up when the door opened, and the expression that crossed her face in the instant before she controlled it was the most honest thing Vespera had ever seen her do. It was fear. Pure, unmistakable, unmasked fear. Then it was gone, and the cold smile returned, and Marivelle rose slowly from her chair. "Vespera Thornwhistle," she said, "how thoughtful of you to spare us the cost of a manhunt. I have come on terms. You are in no position to set terms. I am in every position to set terms. You want me alive and visible and broken at the noon trial. You want my confession. You want the kingdom to see me kneel before you and renounce my claim to the king. You want this because the moment the king arrives at the spire, which he will, your only remaining weapon is a public document signed by me." Vespera stepped further into the room. "I will give you that document. I will sign whatever you place before me. I will kneel before you in the great hall at noon. I will renounce him in front of every wolf in the capital." The High Speaker leaned forward. "On what condition?" "You release the 41 hostages before the trial begins. All of them, including the boy named Tomeling and the widow Maelys. They are escorted to the harbor and put on a ship bound for the northern islands, with sufficient gold to begin new lives. You do this in front of witnesses. You do this before I sign anything." Marivelle laughed. "And what assurance do we have that you will sign once your friends are safe?" "My word as the king's mate." "Your word is worth nothing." "Then take this." Vespera reached into her cloak. The council members stiffened. She drew out the small leather pouch that had hung at her hip for 6 months and set it on the table. 6 dried moonbloom petals. The 7th I used yesterday. You may have read the report from your hunters in Penhallow. 1 petal killed a man through the skin of his wrist. 6 would kill every wolf in this room. I am giving them to you as surety. If I break my word, you have the means to kill me and the child I carry in this room, before the trial." The council members stared at the pouch. Marivelle stared at her. "Why would you do this?" she asked, and there was something almost like wonder in her voice. "Because the lives of 41 innocent wolves are worth more than my pride. Because I have spent 8 months learning what it costs to lose someone you love, and I will not let that cost fall on Tomling's mother today. Because you have already taken everything from me that you could take, Marivelle Drauven, and the only thing I have left to barter with is the one thing you cannot reach." "What is that?" My choice. Marivelle was silent. The high speaker reached for the pouch with a trembling hand. Do not touch it, Vespera said quietly. The petals respond to fear. They will know yours. He drew his hand back. Marivelle made the decision Vespera had been counting on her to make. Release the hostages, she said to the captain at the door. Escort them to the harbor. The cutter that brought them returns within the hour. Pay them passage to the northern islands. Witnesses from the Merchants' Guild and the Apothecaries' Guild are to confirm the embarkation. The captain bowed and left. Marivelle turned back to Vespera. You will sign the renunciation now. I will sign it when word returns that the ship has sailed. You will sign it now, or the deal is void. Then the deal is void? A long, taut silence. Very well. When the ship has sailed. They sat in the small council chamber for 2 hours. No one spoke. The high speaker shifted in his seat and avoided looking at the leather pouch on the table. The council members watched Vespera with the careful eyes of men who had just realized the woman they had condemned in absentia had walked into their stronghold of her own free will, and none of them knew what to make of it. Vespera sat very still and counted her breaths. She felt Kalen through the bond. She felt him moving. She felt the army moving with him. She felt the eastern gate of the city opening to a force that the council had not anticipated, because the council had been told Kalen's army was still encamped a day's ride north. The widow Melis had been a sisterhood agent for 30 years. So had the captain who commanded the eastern gate. At the 11th chime, a messenger arrived from the harbor. The cutter had sailed. 41 hostages were aboard. The Merchants' Guild had recorded every name. The Apothecaries' Guild had countersigned. Marivelle slid a parchment across the table. Sign. Vespera read it. A confession of bond witchcraft. A renunciation of any claim to the king. A statement that the silver mark on her shoulder was a forgery she had cast upon herself. A declaration that Marivelle Drauven was the king's only true mate. Vespera lifted the quill. She dipped it. She held it above the parchment. And she said, very quietly, Marivelle, look at me. Marivelle looked. You should have killed me in the spire 8 months ago. When I knelt on the marble, when the mark first shone, you had the chance. You had the guards. You had the order written. You did not take it because you wanted the kingdom to see me kneel before you, to see me confess, to see me broken in public, because a private death is a martyr and a public surrender is a humiliation. You wanted the humiliation. That was your mistake. What are you? You forgot, Vespera said, that the bond does not need a kingdom to see it. The bond does not require parchment. The bond does not bow to councils. The bond is the oldest law in this land, older than the spire itself, and the only thing that can destroy a true claiming is the death of one of the bonded. She set down the quill. She placed her left palm flat against her own shoulder blade, and she let the mark answer. It did not glow this time. It blazed. Silver light exploded out of her body in a wave that filled the small council chamber, that struck the high speaker and threw him from his chair, that staggered the council members against the walls. The light passed through the stone of the chamber. It passed through the great hall beyond. It passed through the outer walls of the spire, and out across the city, and into the streets. And every wolf in the capital who carried even a drop of pack blood lifted their head at the same instant and knew the mark was real, knew the bond was true, knew the woman the council had condemned was the Alpha King's fated mate, and the woman, they had been told, was the Luna, was a lie. In the streets, the city began to roar. In the eastern gate, a king kicked his black warhorse into a charge with 200 wolves at his back. In the council chamber, Marivelle Drauven snatched the leather pouch from the table and opened it with shaking fingers. The petals did not stir. They do not answer to you, Vespera said quietly. I told you. They know fear. Marivelle threw the pouch aside and lunged for the dagger at her belt. She was fast. Vespera was faster. The change came over her without warning, the way it had come over her in the cottage at Penhallow, but tenfold, 20-fold, finally and fully. The grandmother's working in her blood, the king's mark on her shoulder, the child in her belly with its strange paused heartbeat, the 8 months of grief, and the 3 days of kneeling and the half a year of running, all of it converged in a single instant and broke through the human shape that had contained it. Bone shifted. Skin became fur. The dress she wore split along seams she had sewn herself in Penhallow and fell in tatters around the great wolf that rose where Vespera Thornwhistle had been standing. Her fur was the color of moonlight on snow. Her eyes were amber. She was small for a wolf of the royal line, but she was the wolf of a true mate, and the air around her hummed with the silver light of a bond no relic could silence again. Marivelle's dagger fell from her hand. The white wolf did not kill her. She placed one paw on the woman's chest gently and pressed her down to the floor of the council chamber and held her there with the patient weight of a creature who has 41 reasons to be merciful and 1 reason to be terrible, and who has chosen the 41. The doors of the council chamber burst inward. Caelan Ashvale strode through them with 12 of his wolves at his back, his sword drawn, his face the face of a king who had ridden through the gates of his own city at the head of an army the council had been certain did not exist. He stopped when he saw her. The white wolf turned her amber eyes upon him, and for one long moment, the king and the queen of Caerwyn looked at each other across a council chamber strewn with the broken dignity of the people who had tried to keep them apart. Then the white wolf lifted her great head and howled. The howl was answered. From the eastern gate by 200 wolves of the king's personal guard. From the western quarter by the wolves of the Merchants' Guild. From the apothecaries' quarter. From the harbor. From the temples. From the rooftops of the capital. From every street and alley and walled garden of Caerwyn, until the entire city was howling in a single voice that shook the obsidian foundations of the spire itself. Marivelle Drowvin was taken alive. The High Speaker was taken alive. The 4 council members were taken alive. They were tried, this time openly, with witnesses, and the evidence the sisterhood of the Pale Hand had been gathering for 3 generations was at last laid before the kingdom. The hollow crown's existence was proven by the testimony of the smith who had been forced to forge its replica. The poisoning of the king was proven by the apothecary who had been forced to brew the steadying tonics. The forged confession was proven by the scribe who had written it under threat of his daughter's life. Marivelle Drowvin was stripped of her name, her wolf, and her bloodline. The High Speaker was sentenced at sunrise on the 7th day. The 4 council members were exiled to the southern marshes, where the witch marshes that had once sold the hollow crown to House Drowvin still keep them, in conditions the kingdom has chosen not to examine too closely. The widow Malis returned from the northern islands with the 41 hostages. Tameeling was given to her to raise. His mother had not survived the sea passage. The widow accepted him without a word, and the boy, who had set his sister's broken thumb and run a note across half a village, became, in time, the head of the new sisterhood school in the capital, where the daughters of fisherwives and apothecaries and scribes are now taught the old workings. Oren Valence, agent of the Pale Hand, was named the king's personal courier. He carried the first writ of the new reign north to a small fishing cottage on a windswept cliff, where he placed it in the hands of an old woman who had been told her tenant was dead. The mark on Vespera's shoulder blade healed at last. Not faded. Healed. The silver crescent settled into her skin and became a fine, perfect scar. And on the throat of Caelan Ashvale, on the night they completed the bond properly in the privacy of a chamber, neither of them ever spoke of afterward, an answering crescent appeared. The same shape and the same curve. A claim made openly between 2 people who had at last stopped being kept apart. The child was born in the deep of winter. A girl. The strange paused rhythm of the heartbeat was, the midwife said, simply the rhythm of a child who had been listening through the bond for her father's voice and pausing, every fourth beat, to make certain she could still hear him. Calin held his daughter the moment she was set in his arms, and he wept the way he had wept in the standing stones at Terafell, openly and without shame. And he named her Sorin after the woman who had crushed the hollow crown beneath an iron hammer and given him back to the woman he loved. The kingdom of Carwyn entered an age of slow, careful peace. The new council was rebuilt from those who had stood with the king when standing had been costly. The provincial governors who had refused to sign Maravel's regency were rewarded with lands. The sisterhood of the Pale Hand was made known to the public for the first time in 3 centuries. And in the herb garden behind the old grey light infirmary, the place where a woman in a plain dress had once knelt at sunset to harvest moonbloom petals, a small bronze marker was set into the earth. It bore no name. It bore only a single shape, a crescent of silver. The wolves of Carwyn passed it sometimes on their way to the lower city. They paused. They lowered their heads. They moved on. And in the highest chamber of the obsidian spire, where 2 had become one and remained one for the rest of their lives, the Alpha King and his true Luna lay together in the deep blue hour before dawn, with their daughter sleeping between them, and they did not speak. They did not need to. The bond spoke for them. It always had. It always would.